They say you can measure the health of a civilization by the health of its rivers. If that's true, then the Indus, one of the great arteries of human history, is whispering a terrible truth. Its breath is thinning, its body cracking, and the world it once cradled is slipping into a silent unraveling. At first, it doesn't scream. No river ever does. It vanishes in stages, like memory, a thinning trickle in a dry canal, a cracked delta floor littered with salt, a fisherman with no catch and no words. But look closer beneath the silence. There is a groan that starts in the glaciers of the Himalayas and echoes down through the plains of Pakistan, past cities that once sparkled with the intellect and ingenuity of the Indus Valley civilization, now cloaked in dust, heat, and desperation. This is not just a story of water. It is a story of us. The Indus River birthed one of the earliest human civilizations some 5,000 years ago. Mohenjo-daro and Harappa were not mere dots on a map, they were thriving. Intricate cities with advanced sewage systems, gridded urban planning, and art that spoke of a people who understood both elegance and endurance. These were not the scattered tribes of a primitive past. They were builders of order, harmony, and collective identity. And the river was their spine. But the same river that once gave life is now bearing witness to a slow death. Climate change has begun to melt the Himalayan glaciers faster than any prediction ever dared to forecast. These glaciers feed the Indus. For now, the flow surges erratically in certain seasons, a cruel illusion of abundance. But this is borrowed time. As the glaciers retreat, the annual rhythm of snowmelt that has fed fields and families for millennia will taper off, first gradually, then brutally. And as the sky grows hotter, the land grows harder. Pakistan, home to most of the Indus's length, is one of the most water-stressed countries on Earth. The river that once surged with dignity now struggles to reach the Arabian Sea. Some years, it doesn't make it at all. A river that once carried entire economies on its backs now limps forward like an old man, burdened by neglect, stolen by industry, choked by politics. What caused this part of the answer lies in the concrete labyrinths of cities like Lahore and Karachi, where growing populations demand more water than nature can provide. It lies in dams, some necessary, some reckless, that carve the river into pieces, interrupting its flow like surgery without anesthesia. It lies in the unchecked withdrawal for agriculture, the monoculture of thirsty crops like sugarcane and cotton that guzzle more than the land can sustainably give. But most of all, it lies in forgetting. For centuries, people revered rivers. The Indus, known locally as Sindh, was sacred before borders and treaties, before the first brick was laid in Mohenjo-daro. It was not just water, it was rhythm, it was story, it was ancestor. But modern life has broken that bond. The river has become a resource, not a relative. And so we take and take and take until the only thing left is regret. The fishermen who once relied on the delta now migrate to cities where they live on the margins, stripped of their heritage. Farmers whose grandparents grew wheat with nothing but canal water now watch their fields curl in the sun, the soil crusting over like old scars. Even the great archaeological sites are in danger. Rising salinity, urban encroachment, and the sheer indifference of modern priorities threaten to erase the physical memory of this civilization. And here's the terrible symmetry: as the river dies, so does the civilization it once gave life to. Not in the cinematic explosion of war or conquest, but in the quieter, slower erosion of meaning. A child growing up near the banks of the Indus today is more likely to associate it with pollution, scarcity, and political tension than with sacredness, abundance, or unity. The cradle is becoming a grave. But a grave, too, can speak. It can whisper warnings. It can stir memories. The Indus doesn't want to die. It wants to be remembered. Not with hashtags or diplomatic speeches, but with action, reverence, and change. It wants us to see it not just as a vanishing waterway, but as a mirror showing us what happens when we sever the veins of the very body we live within. Stand on the banks of the Indus in the Sindh region at dawn, and you might catch a glimmer of what once was a pale shimmer of mist curling over the water. Birds wheeling in silence, the last whisper of cool air before the sun begins to scorch the earth. But look closer, in the beauty fragments. The riverbed is shallower, the water browner. Plastic bottles drift past reeds. A goat drinks from a puddle where a tributary used to flow. This isn't just environmental decay, it's spiritual erosion. The Indus River was once a sacred lifeline, its name etched not only into maps, but into identities. The very word India stems from the Indus. Empires rose along its course. But now, the spiritual thread that once tied people to its flow has loosened. Where once people performed rituals and festivals to honor the river, now they line up with plastic jerry cans at tanker trucks, waiting hours for rationed water. In some villages, wells have gone dry. The hand pumps groan, delivering nothing but dust. And when the rains fail more frequently now, more unpredictably, it's not just crops that fail. It's marriages that collapse under financial strain. Children pulled from school, generations pushed into cities already overflowing, looking for jobs that don't exist. The river's collapse ripples into every corner of life. Dams were once built in the name of progress. Structures like Tarbela and Mangla were marvels of human ingenuity. But even marvels come with consequences. These massive barriers have changed the pulse of the river. What used to be a slow and constant lifeblood is now controlled, manipulated, and often withheld. The natural silt that once replenished the farmlands no longer arrives. The delta, once lush and sprawling, is starving. Seawater intrudes inland, poisoning wells and crops, creeping slowly like a shadow over the memory of fertility. Then there's the politics, always politics. The Indus Waters Treaty, signed in 1960 between India and Pakistan, was hailed as a diplomatic triumph. And perhaps it was. But treaties can only work when nature behaves. And nature, pushed past her limits, is beginning to rebel. Glaciers vanish. Monsoons shift. Flash floods strike with fury, while the next season brings nothing at all. Climate change is rewriting the script that the treaty depends on, and the old agreements now hang in the balance. Add to this the tension between upstream and downstream users, between provinces, between nations. Suspicion brews. Accusations fly. One side accuses the other of withholding, of damming, of diverting. And the river mute and burden keeps shrinking. The very thing that should unite has become another border, another contest of control. And in the middle of it all, the people watch. Watch as the river grows sick. Watch as political leaders pose for photographs beside dry canals and half-finished irrigation projects. Watch as promises fall like dust in the heat. And perhaps worst of all, they watch as the young grow up without reverence, without the stories, the poetry, the awe. Because when a river dies, it's not just a body of water that disappears. It's a culture, a worldview, a rhythm of life. There was a time when poets spoke of the Indus with longing, when children were told of its powers and mysteries, when to live near its banks was to live with pride. But pride doesn't grow in dry soil. It needs water. It needs song. It needs care. Today, a quiet despair settles in the air like mist over the delta. Not the kind that screams or protests, but the kind that sighs, that folds inwards, that accepts, reluctantly, a future less than what was dreamed. And yet, there are those who still remember. A small group of ecologists tracking migratory birds that still dare to visit the shrinking wetlands. A school teacher who brings her students to the riverbank tells them the legends of Sindh, of Shiva's hair holding its flow. A farmer who plants native trees along the canals, knowing he may never see them grown but planting them anyway. A boatman who still casts his net, not for fish he knows they are gone, but for peace, for continuity, for a ritual that must not be forgotten. They are not many, but they are holding a line. The last line between memory and extinction, between the river's old song and the silence that threatens to replace it. The Indus may be dying, but it is not dead. Not yet. When you speak to the elders along the Indus, men and women whose eyes have watched the tides of change sweep over their lands, they often say the river speaks to those who listen. But fewer and fewer are listening now. In the village of Thatta, where the Indus once poured wide into the Arabian Sea, you meet people who remember a time when the river came alive in festivals, when songs were sung to its rhythm and boats danced on its surface like prayers in motion. Now, they say the river has become quiet, not in peace, but in pain. It's a subtle death, the kind you don't notice all at once. Not like a dam breaking or a flood roaring through a town. No, this death is slow, happening in inches. Salinity creeps in grain by grain, rendering entire rice fields barren. Livestock drink and fall ill. The once green banks are now salt-encrusted, cracked like skin in drought, and with every season, fewer farmers return. Some leave, others stay, waiting for a miracle that feels more like myth. And perhaps that's the most haunting part. The Indus, once a symbol of abundance and continuity, is now seen as a gamble, a question mark, something you survive near, not thrive with. In cities like Sukkur and Hyderabad, water is rationed. Entire neighborhoods wait days for tankers. People fight over hoses. Women walk miles with jugs. The irony is bitter, living beside a mighty river, yet dying of thirst. And all the while, the clock ticks louder. The Himalayan glaciers are receding faster than ever. Some scientists say that by 2100, two-thirds of them could vanish. Without that glacial reservoir, the Indus will cease to be perennial. It will become seasonal, intermittent, eventually, perhaps, absent. But this isn't just an environmental tragedy. It's a civilizational crisis. Because rivers are not just about agriculture or electricity. They are about identity. The Indus shaped not only landscapes, but psyches. It taught people when to sow and when to reap. It shaped mythologies and metaphors. It defined boundaries not just of land, but of being. Without the Indus, what becomes of Sindh? What becomes of a people whose namesake comes from the river itself? This is a question no one wants to answer. It's easier to divert, to drill deeper wells, to build taller dams, to blame someone upstream. But all of it is reaction. All of it is delay. And delay, in this case, is a death sentence. The warning signs are not subtle anymore. Lake Manchar, once Pakistan's largest freshwater lake and part of the Indus system, has turned toxic. In 2022, it had to be deliberately breached to prevent flooding, displacing thousands. Entire ecosystems collapsed under the weight of mismanagement and climate chaos. Children waded through water not knowing whether it would heal or poison. This is how civilizations unravel, not with a bang, but with a tide that rises 1 centimeter too high, or one crop that fails too often, with families that no longer teach their children to fish, with temples abandoned because the river no longer flows near. And yet, there are still choices. Technology offers glimpses of hope: drip irrigation, desalination, water recycling, glacier monitoring. But technology without will is like a boat without oars. What's needed more urgently is a change of heart, a cultural reckoning, a return to reverence. We need to ask ourselves, what is a river worth, not just in rupees or kilowatts or crop yields, but in memory, in story, in soul? Because no economy can replace a river. No pipeline can replace sacred flow. No treaty can compensate for forgetting. There is still time. Not much, but enough. Enough to teach children that the Indus was not always like this, that it once roared with life, that fish once shimmered in its depths, and poets once drew from its pulse, that cities rose not by dominating it, but by living with it. If we remember that, maybe we can rebuild something. Maybe not the civilization as it once was, but something rooted, enduring, and honest. Not built on control, but on care. Not on dominion, but on balance. Because when we learn to live with rivers, not over them, we learn to live with the planet and with ourselves. The story of the Indus is the story of human ambition, its rise, its glory, and its blind spots. But it's also a story of nature's quiet dignity, and what happens when we forget that every gift has its limits. Some say we're in the Anthropocene now, the age where humans are the dominant force shaping the planet. But what does that mean when we stand before a river like the Indus, ancient beyond empires? Now gasping under the weight of our progress, we have dammed it, drained it, divided it, renamed it, and still it flows. Still, it gives through less and less each year. And what do we get back? In the Delta, mangrove forests once thrived, sheltering fish, birds, and the people who lived among them. They've been cut, stripped away for industry, for expansion, for short-term gains. But the losses are not short-term. They stretch through generations. With the mangroves went the fish, and with the fish went the livelihoods. And with those livelihoods went the stories that once tethered identity to place. The loss isn't just ecological, it's cultural. For the people of Sindh, the Indus is not a natural resource. It is Sindhu-Darya, a sacred river. For centuries, they believed it had a soul. Now, they watch its body fragment. They watch industry siphon its blood. They see its veins rerouted into pipelines, channeled into cement, and they grieve. But it's not only grief. There's also shame. A quiet, heavy shame that hangs in the air like heat, because everyone knows, everyone sees, the politicians, the developers, the engineers, the citizens. They know the Indus is dying, but knowing has not yet become caring, and caring has not yet become action. The tragedy deepens when we realize that this is not just Pakistan's river. The Indus begins high in the Tibetan plateau, winds through Ladakh in India, curves into Gilgit-Baltistan, and flows through the entire length of Pakistan before touching the sea. It crosses not just landscapes, but borders, identities, tensions. It is shared water, and shared water demands shared vision. But cooperation is fragile in a world built on competition. The glaciers that feed the Indus are shrinking, but regional politics often reduce the crisis to finger-pointing. India builds a dam, Pakistan protests. Pakistan diverts flow, India accuses. Meanwhile, the river slips away like time through a broken hourglass. And all the while, the people along its banks do what they've always done, they adapt. But adaptation has a ceiling. You can't adapt to an absence. You can't irrigate from a dry canal. You can't pray at a dead river. So what now? What do we do when the river that birthed one of humanity's first civilizations is on the brink of collapse? We stop, we listen. We listen to the scientists, yes, the ones telling us how to model glacial flow, how to conserve water, how to monitor aquifers. But we also listen to the elders, to the poets, to the boatmen, to the children who stand barefoot at the river's edge and ask, why is it so small now? We must begin to restore not only the flow, but the relationship. That means rethinking agriculture not as a right to consume endlessly, but as a duty to live in rhythm with the seasons. It means restoring wetlands, not building over them. It means investing not only in dams, but in community-managed canals, in systems that prioritize survival over profit. And above all, it means remembering. Remembering that the Indus is not just a line on a map. It is a lineage, a living thing, an ancestor, a teacher, a warning. Because if we lose the Indus, we don't just lose water, we lose the thread that ties our present to our past, the thread that might guide us into a future where we no longer treat rivers as commodities, but as companions. And perhaps that's the redemption that still lies ahead. Not a return to some golden age, but a new age wiser, humbler, still wet with memory. We cannot undo the harm, but we can change the story. If we act now not in panic, but in reverence maybe, just maybe, the Indus will carry more than our sins to the sea. Maybe it will carry a new beginning.